The Tennessee Titans showed in 2024 that if you're going to be bad, do it right. If you're going to get bad, go all the way. They did. I'm so proud of them. Like anybody could sit there and try to stumble fuck their way into screwing things up and winning 5 or 6 games, but they didn't. They went the distance. They finished 3-14. It didn't matter whether it was Will Levis or if it was Mason Rudolph. Both were bad. Should have just stuck with Levis the whole year. Because at least it gives you some memorable fuck ups as mayonnaise eating ass. But yeah, doesn't matter which quarterback you put in, they were bad. Not a good sign. Now you had Tony Pollard go over 1,000 yards rushing and Calvin Ridley go over 1,000 yards receiving, but that's about the extent of the highlights from the offense, right? Um, you know what I mean? Like they just couldn't find a way to get things done when it mattered. They would have bad turnovers from the quarterbacks. Something would happen, which is a shame because their defense wasn't totally, completely god awful last year. They certainly weren't great, but they weren't all bad. They finished second in terms of fewest yards allowed in the league. Now, you could say part of that is a bit misleading because teams were playing against a bad offensive unit in the Titans, so they didn't have to move the ball as much. They took advantage of turnovers, got in great field position, were able to easily score points, and all of that is true. So, it's one of those things you got to be careful. But at the end of the day, none of that matters, right, Titans fans? You got the job done. You got yourself the number one overall pick. Gonna be bad, go all the fucking way. Because you know, as you were watching this season, that you didn't have the right quarterback on your roster and you wanted to be in a position to be able to draft that guy. And that's what your hard work and dedication to the tank did last year, ultimately. Um, but this team obviously can't just sit there and say, hey, we got the top overall pick. That's going to fix everything. It certainly doesn't. They needed to get to work in the offseason. And I think they did, right? They signed Dan Moore Jr. and Kevin Zeitler, added them to the offensive line. Dan Moore solid. Kevin Zeitler, even in his 30s, is still a stud. Frankly, kind of wish the Bears would have signed him instead of trading for Jonah Jackson, but nonetheless, um, those are two big upgrades on that offensive line. Now you're talking about a unit that in recent years they've drafted Skoronski in the first round. They've drafted J.C. Latham in the first round. You add in a couple other guys here, and all of a sudden that offensive line goes from being a weakness to potentially a strength of this team. They signed Tyler Lockett and Van Jefferson to improve that wide receiver group. Tyler Lockett's going to certainly probably slot in opposite Calvin Ridley as your second kind of focal point wide receiver in their offense. Draymond Jones and Xavier Woods were signed to improve the defense. They signed Johnny Hecker and Joey Sly to upgrade their punting and kicking, which certainly needed it, I think, from last year. So this was a team that went about trying to improve both sides of the ball, their special teams, and I thought did an adequate job of that. Right, the highlight to me was the signing of Johnny Hecker and Joey Sly in terms of special teams, and then the signings of Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler to address their gaping voids on their offensive line. As we talked about before, though, the biggest outcome from this past season for the Titans was they ended up in position to be able to get the number one overall pick. And the answer was obvious very early on who it needed to be. It was going to be Cam Ward. He just felt like he was clearly the top quarterback in this year's draft class. He was the guy most poised in position to be a franchise type of dude. And the Titans got their guy. So now the clock kind of starts over for head coach Brian Callahan. What I wasn't so great about was their next couple of picks in the draft. Like they took Oladejo in round 2 as an edge rusher, Kevin Winston Jr. in round 3, the safety. I think those are good, solid picks, and those will be guys that'll both start for this team. But, man, you draft Cam Ward, you got to immediately prioritize the build around him. And you could say, well, maybe the offensive line wasn't a huge weakness, right? Okay, fair enough. But do you have a game-changing running back on your roster? No. How about your wide receiver group? Yes, you've added Tyler Lockett. Yes. You have Calvin Ridley, but is that enough? No. Now, I know they went into day 3 of the draft and they added DK and Iomanor at wide receiver and Gunnar Helm at tight end. So they did address it, and I thought they got some good value with those picks in round 4, but felt like you could have done more to address the offense with the second and third round pick, at least one of them. But I understand maybe sometimes the board kind of falls a certain way. You like the fit of certain players, you like the talent profile of certain players, and you feel like they're too good to pass up on. It's just one of those things I always hesitate. Like, you take a quarterback with the number 1 overall pick, and your next moves are to draft 2 defensive guys. It's just always a weird dynamic to me. So, going to have a new look Titans team in a lot of ways in 2025. In terms of the strengths of this roster, I would start off with the offensive line. I talked about that earlier, right? If you maybe have a weakness in that unit, it's Cushenberry at center. But they should be good on the interior with Zeitler and Skoronski, although I don't think Skoronski was all that great last year. Latham should improve in year number 2. And then Dan Moore should at least be solid on the other side as a bookend tackle. That's going to be a strength of this unit. Good situation, good position to put your rookie quarterback Cam Ward in. And then you look at the defensive line. You've got Jeffrey Simmons, you've got Sweat, you've got Sebastian Joseph Day. Like, it's a front 3 that is a problem, especially Simmons. Like, Simmons is a stud, right? So if you're talking about fundamentally how do you build a team, and you're talking about a team that is pretty solid in the trenches on both sides of the ball, like, you start to sit there and say, oh shit, like, you've got something building here, and they do. I know I mentioned before, like, they don't have a star in the receiving core, but you do look at Tyler Lockett and you look at Calvin Ridley and you say, hey, you know what? That's not a bad unit overall. Again, a solid position to put your young quarterback in. But still plenty of question marks for me on this team. Like, where's the pass rush going to come from, especially on the edges? The running game efficiency with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears wasn't all that great last year. They need to improve that. Maybe with the upgrades on the offensive line they made, it certainly will. And then obviously Cam Ward, like, he's the number 1 overall pick, yes, but he's still going to be a rookie quarterback. How is he going to adjust to the NFL speed, the NFL tempo, the NFL game and rhythm? You know, time will only tell. But if he can start showing some flashes of where he is legit going to be a franchise guy for this team, it changes the organization pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. And that's all that matters this year. And let's be clear here. Even as I talk about the schedule and the records and everything else, none of that shit matters in the grand scheme of things unless it's like directly a result of Cam Ward being really good as a rookie and showing he could be the guy. That's the only thing that matters this year for the Titans. Wins, losses are clearly secondary. It is about Cam Ward and his development and showing that he can be the guy. It is that simple. But as we look ahead for the Titans, you know, last place team last year, last place schedule this year, there's some opportunities here to get a bit of a turnaround and a bit of an improvement. Looking at weeks 3 through 8, they host Indianapolis, then go to Houston, then they go on the road to Arizona and Vegas, so 3 straight road games, and they come back with games at home against the Patriots and the Colts. Like, you look at that, 5 of those 6 matchups are against teams that did not make the playoffs last year. So as a result, 3 of the games of those 6 being in the division, there's a chance there for the Titans to make a little noise. Not trying to get too carried away here, but you know, if Cam Ward's playing solid and the lines are holding up well, you know, they got a chance they can, you know, surprise some people early on. Then you look at weeks 13 and 14, they've got Jacksonville at home and then Cleveland on the road. You'd certainly want to point to those games as games that the Titans need to be focused on trying to win. Same thing with week 17 and 18 when they host New Orleans and they go on the road to Jacksonville. I actually think that with a rookie quarterback, you know, this team is not great by any stretch of the imagination, but I think strategically they made some good additions on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. I think this team is going to be improved by quite a bit in 2025. I think they're at least a year away from going after the Texans fully, but I think a 7-10 or an 8-9 season is definitely within the cards and within the possibilities here for the Tennessee Titans. And if they do that and Cam Ward plays well, now Titans fans can go into next offseason and start to feel a little excited about the potential possibilities for 2026.